Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Peacemakers number 2, talking about the opportunities that we have in conflict. To set up this story, I want to tell part of David's story, King David, before he was king. The first king of Israel was Saul. And it wasn't long after Saul was crowned king that God realized that Saul's heart was not after him. It was not seeking after him. He became very proud, very arrogant. And so the prophet Samuel was sent to anoint David. And that's a whole nother cool story. But David is anointed king. However, Saul is still king. And so David and Saul are connected in several ways. David plays music to calm Saul's nerves. David does some fighting in Saul's armies. David kills Goliath. The people very quickly begin making David a hero and neglecting Saul. And Saul gets very, very jealous to the point that he begins seeking for ways to kill David. David basically runs for his life, and in the process of this, he begins gathering men around him, kind of a band of merry men, we might say, gathering men around him who support him and be with him, and they are other men who are running for their lives. They are men who are disenfranchised, they are discontented, and they're in trouble in some way with the government or with the king and so on. So this is David's situation. And so him and his band of men are running, trying to avoid Saul and his army and so on. Eventually, David says to himself, I can't keep doing this. I'm going to get killed. So I'm going to go into the enemy territory and live there. So the Philistines were the enemies of the Israelites. David ends up going to Gath and kind of befriending King Achish and pretending that, hey, I'm an enemy of Saul and I want to be your friend because you're enemies of Saul too. And so he begins to convince King Achish that he is his friend, and to the point that toward the end of all of this happening, the Israelites and the Philistines are going to have this big battle. And David and his men leave their village, and they're going to join with the Philistine armies against his own people. Now, I think David has a plan of his own in the middle of all of this, but when he shows up and meets with the other Philistine kings, they say, Achish, what do you have David here for? Why is he here? He's an enemy of ours. Don't you know that? And Achish says, no, it's no problem. He's my friend. He's going to fight for us. He's going to be amazing. Well, they reject David and his men to be part of their army. And so David, they're all upset about it, but they go back home to their village. They arrive home, and their village is in ruins. Some Amalekite raiders have come, and they've destroyed everything, burned everything, and taken all their wives and children and the livestock, all the plunder, and it's all gone. David and his men sit down, and they're all crying and weeping and getting very angry at David. Here is David in the middle of one of the biggest conflicts you can probably ever imagine. He's surrounded on every side by enemies. And here's what David says in 1 Samuel 30, verse 6. David was very upset, for the men were thinking of stoning him. Each man grieved bitterly over his sons and daughters. But David drew strength from the Lord his God. Wow. Here in the middle of conflict, instead of just seeing the obstacles and the problems of the conflict, David sees opportunity, and he's able to do that because he draws strength from God at that time. Our big idea today is that conflicts provide opportunities to bring God glory. We're going to look at it in three ways. First of all, to trust God, an opportunity to trust God, an opportunity to obey God, and to acknowledge God and the provision of God. And this is what David does in this humongous conflict that he's having. You know, perhaps David's case is extreme. Most of us don't experience that level of conflict on a regular basis, but maybe you are afraid for your life right now. Perhaps you're afraid that an enemy may destroy your reputation with their words. Are you living some sort of double life? One person in one place and then you're somebody else in another place? Has an enemy taken something or someone from you? You are perhaps in serious conflict and you need help. This message can be very helpful for you. Part of it is how we deal with conflict, but the more important thing is why. Why? Because conflicts can provide opportunities for us to bring God glory. That's our big idea of this story of David. Conflicts can bring opportunities to give God glory. The first way he does that is to place his trust in God. 1 Samuel 30, verses 6 to 8. David was very upset, for the men were thinking of stoning him. Each man grieved bitterly over his sons and daughters. But David drew strength from the Lord his God. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Should I pursue this raiding band? Will I overtake them?" He said to him, "Pursue, for you will certainly overtake them and carry out a rescue." Later on, David himself wrote from Psalm 50, verse 15, "Pray to me when you are in trouble. I will deliver you, and you will honor me." I love it. In this situation, in this conflict, David realizes that, yes, he is the one responsible. He's been the one making decisions and calling the shots for his group, for his army, so to speak. But his family is gone too. I think at this point he has 2 wives, which that's another story. His family is gone too. His livestock is gone too. He's lost everything too. But he realizes that, yes, he was making decisions about all these things. And so he takes his own part of the responsibility in the middle of all of that. Even in the middle of a mutiny, you know, they're talking about stoning him to death. But he doesn't fight back. He doesn't cry or pout. He gets strength from God. And then he seeks and he finds direction from God. Then he leads the group. He steps up and he continues to lead the group in this positive direction. If you lead a group of 3, or a church of 1,000, or a multinational company, then this is for you. There are times when things are not going well and people are picking up stones to throw. Take responsibility for your part. Don't fight back. Acknowledge your feelings to God, to yourself. Pray for strength from God. By faith, seek guidance from Him, and then lead. Stand up and lead. The first thing David does in the middle of this conflict is to trust God And he does that in an amazing way for the glory of God, right? Because conflicts provide opportunities for us to give God glory. The second thing he does is he obeys. So yes, he gets up, he leads, but what he's doing is he's obeying what God has said. God has promised, pursue, you will overtake, and you will carry out a rescue. So he does this obedience in several practical ways, specific ways. First of all, with compassion. He has compassion, first of all, on his own men. So in verses 9 to 10, we read this. So David went, accompanied by his 600 men. When he came to the Wadi Bezor, those who were in the rear stayed there. David and 400 men continued the pursuit, but 200 men who were too exhausted to cross the river stayed there. So he has left 200 men behind, and he's continuing on this raid with 400. Which is another step of faith, it seems to me. However, I think he's having compassion on these men who are too exhausted to go on. They're not going to be any help in the fight anyway, right? So he says, you stay here, you stay with our things, you stay with the supplies. We're going to go with 400 and we're going to travel light. He's compassionate to his own men, and he's compassionate to a stranger. Verses 11 to 14 say this. Then they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. They gave him bread to eat and water to drink. They gave him a slice of pressed figs and 2 bunches of raisins to eat. This greatly refreshed him, for he had not eaten food or drunk water for 3 days and nights. David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" The young man said, "I am an Egyptian, the servant of an Amalekite man. My master abandoned me when I was ill for 3 days. We conducted a raid on the Negev of the Kerethites, on the area of Judah, and on the Negev of Caleb. We burned Ziklag." So David finds someone who has been left behind, apparently by this raiding party, this party of Amalekites. He has recovered somewhat, in the sense that he's able to drink water, he's able to take some food, and he's refreshed, and he's able to give information to David and his men. David shows compassion on his own men and on this stranger. He also obeys with integrity. So here's what happens then. Verse 15, David said to him, "Can you take us down to this raiding party?" He said, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to this raiding party." So he took David down, and they found them spread out over the land. They were eating and drinking and enjoying themselves because of all the loot that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. So David acts with integrity. He keeps his word to this young man that he will not kill him, he will not hand him over to his master, but he will guard him, guard his life, because they're making this negotiation. They're making this agreement. David obeys with compassion and with integrity, and then he also definitely obeys with perseverance. Verse 17 says, "But David struck them down from twilight until the following evening. None of them escaped, with the exception of 400 young men who got away on camels." David retrieved everything the Amalekites had taken. He also rescued his 2 wives. There was nothing missing, whether small or great. He retrieved sons and daughters, the plunder, and everything else they had taken. David brought everything back. David took all the flocks and herds and drove them in front of the rest of the animals. People were saying, "This is David's plunder!" So all of a sudden they've turned from stoning David to celebrating David once again. David is the victor. He's the one who is bringing the plunder back to Ziklag. God has spoken. Pursue. You will overtake. You will rescue. And boom, David obeys the promise of God in the strength of God. He didn't stop until it was accomplished. Once God has spoken to you, then what? Do you ask again? Do you seek for a sign like Gideon? Or do you strap on your weapon and go? What has God said to you? What has He promised? Go, overtake, rescue. But notice that in his task of restoring, David didn't do more damage. He showed compassion to people. You know, sometimes when we are on mission, even a Christian mission, we don't take care with people. Don't allow the task to crush the person. Everyone needs rest, some more than others. That's okay. As well, everyone has a task to perform. Some will stay with the supplies and some will go into battle. God gives strength to both and rewards all for their faithfulness, right? Continue to be a person of your word. David promised to spare the Egyptian servant's life if he would help him, and he did that. If you are a small business owner, or a team leader, or a government employee, or a parent, you need to be someone who keeps his or her word. You know, we sometimes try to make excuses for changing our story or for changing the contract to which we agreed. As much as it depends on you, even if it hurts, keep your word. Parents, don't be too quick to set up consequences for misbehavior that you cannot follow through on. Your kids need to know that if you say it, you will do it. It not only brings a sense of security to our kids, but it also models integrity to those little ones who catch so much. And finish the task. Don't leave it half done or even 90% done. Because on the other hand, David showed no mercy in his pursuit of justice. You know, we sometimes struggle with the ideas of killing and destruction, but we need to be careful to not put ourselves in the place of God. We see and know so little of the big picture. And He knows the beginning from the end. He knows hearts and minds. Only He can bring about the judgment and discipline needed in each and every circumstance. And He does it perfectly. Conflicts provide opportunities to bring God glory. David trusted God, he obeyed God, and he acknowledged God, the leadership and the kingship of God, actually. Here's what happened at the end. Verse 21, Then David approached the 200 men who had been too exhausted to go with him, those whom they had left at the Wadi Bezor. They went out to meet David and the people who were with him. Then David approached the people. He asked how they were doing. Good. Compassion again. But all the evil and worthless men among those who had gone with David said, Since they didn't go with us, we won't give any of the loot to them that we have retrieved. They may take only their wives and children. Let them lead them away and be gone. But David said, No, you shouldn't do this, my brothers. Look at what God has given us. He has protected us and has delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to you in this matter? The portion of the one who went down into the battle will be the same as the portion of the one who remained with the equipment. Let their portions be the same. From that time onward, it was a binding ordinance for Israel right up to the present time. Interesting. You know, there are always people around who like to divide. And in this case, it was literally about dividing the spoil, right? But they wanted to divide the goers and the stayers. A number of years ago, Laura and I were in West Africa and part of an international school. And in those days, there were dormitories at the school where kids would come and live because their parents were in faraway places, out in the bush of Africa, with no other educational options that were great for them. And so this was mainly a boarding school. And so in our dorm, we had a number of kids that we took care of, and they went to school and so on. Well, a couple of times a year, we would have a dorm supper together in our dorm. And normally we went to a dining hall to eat, but we would eat in our dorm that night and have a special meal, and then we would do some fun activity together. Well, this particular night, we had reserved the small concrete soccer court. We called it Petit Poteau. And we had reserved that space for our dorm to play. We were going to play Petit Poteau just as a dorm family. Well, very quickly, we started playing. Very quickly, kids from other dorms came and they began complaining that we weren't letting them, I wasn't letting them play when we had reserved the space. Well, there was some conflict that was going on, and a few minutes later, actually our supervisor came by the area and was riding his bike around the campus. And some of the kids, as I recall, some of the kids mentioned to him that they weren't being allowed to play. And he made a suggestion, which I remember to this day. He said, "Hey, why not both and? Why not? You guys are playing, and that's great, but why not allow some others to join in with your fun here?" And so it was a good lesson, and a lesson I've remembered for a long time now, that it's much better to think both and instead of either or. We know from other parts of David's story that his band of merry men, his band of 600 men, consisted of people in all kinds of trouble. Some of them still tended to stir up trouble wherever they went. And this was an easy way to do it, right? And it still happens today. How quickly we start to divide. If we look around our world, even today in the time of COVID-19, we realize there are divisions happening so quickly. Rich versus poor, black versus white, Christian versus everyone, politicians versus ordinary people, movie stars versus the common people, those who fight versus those who stay with the supplies, athletes versus computer nerds or whatever. But isn't it tragic? Isn't it a waste? We're all just people with way more in common than the differences that we proclaim. How is David able to bring unity in this fight? He acknowledges that God has provided the victory and has given the spoil and has provided protection as well. It's much better to have the view that we are all equal and needy before God. We never know what the next dispute will be. We might be on the receiving end of this dispute, but we may be on the taking end of another dispute. Much better to stand with those who submit to the provider of all good things. David trusted God and obeyed God and acknowledged God in the middle of this huge conflict. And when he did these things, He took the obstacle of the conflict and he turned it into an opportunity to bring glory to God. May God help us do the exact same thing.